Shrimp is a top-tier protein for home cooks. Inexpensive, quick cooking, relatively non-perishable in its frozen form, high protein, low fat. What's not to love? Well, I'll tell you what, whenever I cook with shrimp, I empty the bag into a bowl of water to defrost. After like 10 minutes, they're fully thawed, so I pour the water down the sink. I splashed shrimp water all over the sink, so I take a mental note that the sink is currently contaminated. I peel the shells and then put those into a pot so I can make shrimp stock with the waste instead of throwing it out. The shrimp are peeled and almost ready to cook, but they're still wet, so I've got to pat them dry before seasoning. I usually sear them really quickly so the meat doesn't overcook, and although I now have cooked shrimp, I do also have one dirty pan, one pot full of shells that I need to use for stock, plus one big bowl and a great big sink that all need to be scrubbed down to be ridden of raw seafood juice. Consider then the benefits of cooking shrimp this way instead. Dump the whole frozen bag into a pot of cold water. This is 1 pound of shrimp and 1 quart of water. Season that water with salt and sugar. After like 10 or 15 minutes, it's defrosted. Put that same pot of shrimp and cold water on the stove over high heat and wait until a thermometer dipped into the water gets to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. At that point, the shrimp will have changed color, and if you wanted to probe a few, you'd see that they are all at least 140 in the middle. So now you have cooked shrimp. You never had to touch raw shrimp. None of your bowls have to be washed of raw seafood. The flavor of the shrimp is maximized because it was cooked in the shell. The texture is perfect since they were gently poached and thus hard to overcook. The shells are easier to remove because you're peeling them off firm flesh instead of the squishy, wet, raw variety. And to top it all off, you're left with free stock at the end. The only way I can think to improve this method would be to put the shells back in the pot and boil it hard for 15 more minutes with aromatics like garlic, celery, and onion. You could then use that fortified, slightly reduced shrimp stock the next day to make something like shrimp risotto. Yum. If this process sounds familiar, it's because it's America's Test Kitchen's method for making shrimp cocktails. So before I go into how this method can be applied to all of your shrimp cookery, let me show you one really nice shrimp cocktail recipe. In a pot, I will use hot oil to brown shallot, lemongrass, garlic, ginger, and a couple squeezed limes, peel and all, plus a lime leaf. After I've gotten some color, I'll deglaze with a can of coconut milk and 2 cans worth of water. Let that boil for 10 minutes and cut the heat. I'll let that steep and cool off and then strain out all the solids. I can now take this frozen bag of easy peel jumbo shrimp, easy peel is deveined but the shell is still on, so very win-win-win, and just dump it into the cooled off broth. I'll give it a few minutes for the ice to melt and the shrimp to thaw, and then I can crank the heat to high. By the time the broth hits 160, the shrimp have changed color and cooked to a tender texture. I'll fish them out into a bowl so I can finish them off with some olive oil, some chopped cilantro, and a sprinkle of flaky salt. I also like to splash a few spoonfuls of the poaching liquid on top, and that's for one reason that no shrimp cocktail recipe seems to want to admit. This poaching liquid is a 10 out of 10 in terms of flavor intensity, and yet the shrimp are still more of like a 2 out of 10. Shrimp cocktail is not a wildly flavorful dish on its own, whether you use a dozen different pungent aromatics or just water, celery, and onion. The recipe for BA's best shrimp cocktail just uses lemon water. Shrimp cocktail usually tastes kind of just like shrimp. That's why you serve it with a punchy cocktail sauce, or in the case of the one I just showed you, a duo of Thai sweet chili sauce and nukyam. So if you rid yourself of the idea that poaching meat or seafood requires a poaching liquid that's got loads of complex flavors, you'll be able to make plain, low-effort poached shrimp and then use that as the basis of this week's meal prep. Look at this shrimp that I poached yesterday. I'm gonna cut it into big chunks, hit it with some sazon, slap it in a flour tortilla filled with queso chihuahua, and hachi mama, I've got a really high-quality shrimp quesadilla in 4 minutes. Lunch is much easier to figure out when you have at least one perfectly cooked protein laying in wait. I made a salad that might keep me fuller longer if it contains some protein. Put cold shrimp on the salad. I stir-fried some frozen veggies before dousing them in a sweet and sticky sauce. Turn the heat off and stir in the pre-cooked shrimp. They will warm up without overcooking, and suddenly you've got a shrimp stir-fry. Buttered noodles again? Better hide it from your boyfriend who gets mad if your meal has no protein in it. Psych. Minced garlic, black pepper, cooked shrimp. Yummy, easy meal. Also, let us not forget that you can just eat a dozen of the poached shrimp cold, like some kind of shrimp cocktail rich emperor. That's the easiest way to make clear to yourself that homemade shrimp cocktail is often miles ahead of the week-old overcooked variety sold in a refrigerated plastic clamshell. I think the only somewhat comparable pre-prepped meat solution is chicken breast cooked sous vide, but poaching shrimp forgoes that fancy expensive tech while maintaining all the benefits. I now view poached shrimp as on par with canned chickpeas because they both allow you to have a meal ready in 15 minutes without all of the cleanup of raw meat. Let garbanzos know that they're on notice and shrimp is coming for their lunch. Trade has paid to be mentioned at the end of this video. My favorite part about doing these ad reads for Trade is that every time at least one person points out the coffee I'm showing on camera to say, hey, that's my local roaster, and they make good stuff. That's what Trade is all about. Their people have taste tested like 450 coffees, and then they pair you with the one that's most likely to suit you. I don't even know how they do it, but they found a way to link up with local roasters from across the country, ask them to roast your coffee fresh right before it gets shipped your way, and then have it show up at your door for a price that's on par with regular schmegular grocery store beans, which smell worse, taste worse, and then went perceptibly stale last month. If you're the type to buy coffee beans at the same place that you get your groceries, the coffee that you get from Trade will taste better than what you've grown accustomed to. That's going to be clear as soon as you smell the bag. Trade is offering you, dear viewer, 40% off your first order when you sign up at drinktrade.com/Shaquille. Slower for you this time. That's drinktrade, TRADE.com/Shaquille for 40% off of your first order. And one last time, really, really fast, drinktrade.com/Shaquille. Thank you.